The Krusty Krab was never truly silent. Even when the lights dimmed and the last bubbles drifted upward through the moonlit windows, the ocean outside still hummed faintly, a low, endless breath pressing against the glass. It wasn't the kind of silence that made you feel lonely. It was the kind that wrapped itself around you, heavy and gentle all at once, like a blanket woven from water and memory. Tonight, that silence had weight. SpongeBob had cleaned everything just the way Mr. Krabs liked it. Tables wiped until they shone, napkin holders neatly aligned, and the grills scrubbed so thoroughly that it reflected the hanging lamps like a dark mirror. He should have gone home by now. Patrick was probably already asleep under his rock, dreaming of ice cream clouds. Even Gary, back in the pineapple, would be curled up near the window, one eye half open, waiting for his owner's footsteps. But SpongeBob lingered. He stood behind the counter, hands folded in his apron, staring across the empty dining room. The wooden walls groaned softly as if settling. The swinging doors to the kitchen creaked each time the current shifted outside. He could almost hear the day echoing faintly, the laughter of customers, the hiss of oil, the squeak of Mr. Krab's boots on the floorboards. Yet those sounds were ghosts now, fading into the calm rhythm of the sea. He sighed, smiling a little. Another perfect day, he whispered to no one. The clock above the register ticked once, then stopped. He blinked. The sound had been steady all week, a little heartbeat counting down to closing time. But now it paused, and in that pause, the entire restaurant seemed to hold its breath. The neon sign outside flickered once, painting the windows in a brief wash of red before fading to black. The only light that remained came from the moon pale, filtered through the water, spilling across the floor in slow-moving patterns. The beams drifted over tables, over the counter, and finally onto the grill where SpongeBob spent most of his waking hours. That's when he heard it, a sound he couldn't quite name. It wasn't loud, more like a tremor beneath the boards, a quiet vibration that seemed to hum from deep under the building. At first he thought it was the freezer, then the water heater. But no, those sounds were mechanical, steady, predictable. This one moved. It rose and fell like breathing. He crouched down and pressed his hand to the floor. The wood was cool. He could feel a faint rhythm, a pulse so subtle it might have been his imagination. Yet it was there, hidden below layers of plank and coral foundation. SpongeBob's smile faded, replaced by a curious tilt of his head. Maybe a loose pipe. He tapped the floor once with his spatula handle. The vibration paused, then returned, slightly stronger. A small thrill ran through him. Not fear, not yet. Just curiosity. He loved mysteries almost as much as he loved cooking. And besides, he told himself, the Krusty Krab was old. Old buildings made noises. The ocean pressed and shifted, and wood swelled with salt water and memory. There was nothing unusual about that. Still, as he stood there listening, something about the rhythm changed. It began to match his own breathing, rising when he inhaled, softening when he exhaled, almost as if the floor were mimicking him. He laughed nervously. Well, that's silly. Floors don't breathe. But the sound didn't stop. It deepened, spreading through the planks in slow ripples, like the echo of a faraway drum. The light from the moon shimmered slightly, broken by the tiny waves outside. The whole restaurant seemed to sway in rhythm, a slow heartbeat beneath the sleeping ocean. SpongeBob moved toward the front door, thinking maybe the current had shifted outside. Maybe it was just the tide. But when he looked out through the glass, the world beyond seemed frozen. No drifting kelp, no wandering fish. Even the bubbles hung motionless, suspended mid-rise as though the sea itself had forgotten how to move. He pressed his hand against the glass. It was colder than usual. His reflection stared back at him, wide eyes, apron slightly wrinkled, mouth half open in a question he couldn't quite form. Behind that reflection, in the dark water, a faint shimmer pulsed once, then vanished. A soft creak echoed from the back room. He turned, heart fluttering like a jellyfish. The noise came again, a gentle shift of wood, the faint clink of a dangling ladle in the kitchen. He called out, "Mr. Krabs, is that you?" No answer. Only the quiet hiss of the fryer cooling down. He took a few careful steps toward the kitchen, shoes squeaking slightly against the wet floor. Each footstep echoed, swallowed quickly by the thick stillness of the room. The hum beneath the boards grew stronger, closer now, as though something down there was listening for him, waiting for each movement. At the kitchen doorway, he stopped. The smell of old grease and salt filled the air. The utensils hung perfectly still. He watched them, waiting for another tremor, another sign. Nothing. He started to laugh again softly, trying to shake the tension from his arms. "I'm just tired, that's all. Maybe I've been working too long." He reached for the switch to turn off the kitchen light. His hand hovered over it. And then, faintly, from beneath his feet, came a sound, not a vibration this time, but a tone, a single low note, deep and mournful, like a wail calling from miles away. It lasted only a second, but in that second every lamp flickered. The shadows along the walls stretched longer, bending toward the floor. SpongeBob froze. The note faded, replaced again by silence. And then, very softly, the hum resumed steady, slow like the rhythm of sleep. He stood there for a long moment, staring at the dark tiles. His reflection shimmered faintly in the metal of the grill. Beneath the floorboards, the unseen pulse continued quiet, patient, older than the Krusty Krab itself. SpongeBob slowly exhaled. The sound of his own breath seemed too loud in the still air. He placed his spatula on the counter and crouched once again, pressing his ear against the cool floorboards. There it was. The hum. Low, deep, almost melodic now. It rose and fell in a strange rhythm, not random, not mechanical. It almost sounded like a song if you listened long enough, a lullaby muffled by layers of wood and time. He tilted his head. The pattern repeated, faint but steady. 3 soft pulses, 1 pause, then another long vibration that seemed to echo outward. 3, 1, long. He whispered the rhythm to himself. It didn't sound like any machine he knew. It didn't sound like plumbing either. It sounded alive. The thought made him smile nervously. Alive? Don't be silly, SpongeBob. Floors don't sing. Buildings don't breathe. But then another thought slipped in, quieter, stranger. What if they remember? He stood and glanced around the restaurant again. Everything seemed ordinary. The napkin holders gleamed in their places. The menu board hung straight and still. The ketchup bottles were perfectly aligned. Nothing was out of order. Yet the feeling of being watched pressed down on him gently, like a weight made of water. He walked to the middle of the room and stamped his foot lightly. The hum responded just for a moment, a low answering thrum, like something far below acknowledging him. He froze. The water outside the windows shimmered faintly, and a cloud of sand drifted past as if disturbed by a current that came from nowhere. Okay. That was new, he whispered. He took a small step back, then another, until his back touched the counter. His mind tried to make sense of it. Maybe it was just the current, maybe a passing whale, maybe even a shift in the seabed beneath the building. But the sound didn't fade. Instead, it grew softer, gentler, almost comforting, like a heartbeat slowing after a long day. And somehow that comfort unnerved him even more. He reached under the counter and pulled out the cleaning checklist. Maybe staying busy would help. Wiping down tables, restocking napkins, normal things, simple things. But even as he worked, he could feel it. The pulse beneath his feet, steady, slow, patient. When he wiped the final table, he realized something odd. The moonlight on the floor had shifted direction. It no longer streamed through the front windows. It came from the kitchen door, faint and silvery, glowing along the cracks in the tiles. SpongeBob frowned. There shouldn't be light there. The kitchen had no open windows, only vents, pipes, and the heavy door leading to the freezer. He hesitated, sponge still in hand. The light flickered once, and grew brighter just a little enough to cast soft ripples across the counter. His curiosity tugged at him again. It always did. Ever since he was little, he'd loved strange lights and unexplained noises. They made him feel like the world still had secrets left to share. So, with slow, careful steps, he walked toward the kitchen. Each footstep seemed louder than the last. The floorboards creaked, groaned slightly, and then as he crossed the threshold, the hum deepened, echoing beneath the tiles like a greeting. The kitchen was dark, save for that thin line of pale light leaking from the space between two floor panels near the grill. The tiles there had always been uneven, a little raised in the middle, like a bubble trapped under glass. SpongeBob knelt down. The light wasn't strong, but it shimmered softly, pulsing in time with the hum. It spilled upward in faint waves, painting his hands with a silvery glow. He brushed his fingers along the edge of the tiles, warm, slightly wet, as if condensation was seeping through from below. He whispered, "What are you?" Of course there was no answer, only the hum, deeper now, slower, heavier. Then a faint click. He looked up sharply. The sound came from behind him, from the metal rack where he kept the spatulas. One had fallen, landing softly on the counter. He picked it up, heart beating fast, trying to laugh it off. All right. No need for pranks, universe. You're scaring the sponge who just wants to mop the floor." But even as he spoke, another sound joined the hum, a faint dripping, steady and rhythmic. Drip, drip, drip. He turned his gaze back to the glowing crack. A droplet of water fell from between the tiles, landing right beside his knee. It glowed faintly for a second before fading into the surface. The floorboards beneath him vibrated again, not in warning this time, but in something that almost felt like speech. 3 pulses, 1 pause, long vibration. The same pattern. He whispered the rhythm aloud again. 3, 1, long. The final pulse stretched longer than before, rising in pitch until it was almost melodic, a whispering tone only half heard, half felt. And then silence. Total silence. Even the ocean seemed to pause outside. SpongeBob stayed kneeling, afraid to move, afraid to breathe too loudly. His reflection shimmered faintly on the wet tiles. The silence pressed around him like a hand closing slowly. Then, somewhere deep beneath him, came a new sound softer than before, like the murmur of distant waves, but layered beneath it was something else, something almost like a sigh. Not mechanical, not natural. A sound that carried weight, intention, and age. It drifted up through the floor, wrapping around him in slow circles, until he could almost swear it was whispering his name. Sponge, Bob. He froze. The voice was faint, muffled, distant, like something speaking through 100 feet of water. He whispered back, trembling, "Who's there?" No response. Just the soft hum, returning, steady as ever. He sat there for a long moment, listening to the rhythm, until finally, exhaustion began to settle over him. His eyelids grew heavy. The vibration beneath him softened, blending with the sound of his heartbeat. And as he leaned back against the counter, half dreaming, half awake, he thought he heard something else faint, almost tender. A lullaby humming from the deep, not meant to scare him, just to remind him he was not alone. When SpongeBob opened his eyes again, he wasn't sure how long he had been sitting there. The restaurant looked exactly the same, quiet, silvered by moonlight, every shadow soft and heavy. But the air felt different now, thicker somehow. Slow, as though the whole room was submerged deeper than before. He blinked a few times and rubbed his eyes. "Get it together, SpongeBob," he murmured. He must have dozed off for a second. That's all. But when he looked down, he noticed something that hadn't been there earlier. The crack in the floor, the one that shimmered faintly with light, was now slightly wider, barely half an inch, but enough for a faint stream of bubbles to rise from it, breaking quietly on the surface before dissolving into the still air. He closed. The light beneath was dimmer now, but steadier, like the glow of a sleeping jellyfish. He whispered softly, "You're still there." The hum responded faintly. A slow ripple of vibration traveled through the floor, up his arms, into his chest. It wasn't unpleasant. It felt warm, familiar even. He smiled nervously. Maybe it's just geothermal activity or a friendly sea current. He chuckled weakly. Sure, a friendly current. Still, curiosity tugged at him like a hook in the tide. He stood and fetched his mop from the corner, using its wooden handle to tap the tiles gently. The sound echoed dull and deep, a hollow tone that confirmed what he already suspected. There was empty space beneath the floor. Not pipes, not rock. Something open. He crouched again and pressed his ear to the tiles. The hum returned, stronger now, resonating through his head, in a low chord that almost resembled words, something like a whispering choir underwater, soft and distant, overlapping and fading. The longer he listened, the more it began to sound like voices. They didn't form sentences, not really just fragments, rising and falling like waves. Sleep. Remember, to beneath. He pulled back, heart fluttering. Nope, I am definitely just hearing the plumbing. Yep, just the pipes. He stood up and paced the room, trying to distract himself. The lights above him flickered once more, faintly buzzing before steadying again. The moonlight moved across the floor, painting the walls in a pale blue glow. The sign outside was dark now. Even the red letters of "Open" had gone cold. SpongeBob stopped at the window. Outside, the ocean was completely still. No drifting seaweed, no passing jellyfish, not even plankton specks moving through the light. The silence pressed against the glass like velvet. And then a faint knock. He turned back toward the kitchen, eyes wide. 3 knocks this time, evenly spaced. Tap, tap, tap. He hesitated, every instinct telling him to leave, to go home, to close the door and forget about the strange floor, the hum, the whispers. But curiosity is a strange tide. It pulls you back, no matter how far you try to swim away. He grabbed a flashlight from the cleaning closet and returned to the kitchen. The light beam cut through the dimness in a narrow cone, glinting off metal pans and spatulas. The mop bucket stood in the corner, still half filled with soapy water. Everything looked exactly as he'd left it, except the crack. It had widened again. Just a little, but enough that he could now see faint shapes shifting beneath the surface. Not movement exactly, but texture, uneven patterns, glimmering faintly in the silvery light. He crouched low and tilted the flashlight beam. The light refracted strangely, bending as if it were passing through glass or water. For a heartbeat, he saw what looked like coral, ancient, colorless, petrified coral, forming a circular pattern beneath the tiles. And at the center of that circle, something metallic, round, rusted, bolted. He blinked, leaning closer. His breath fogged the surface of the tile. Is that a hatch? The hum beneath him deepened, low and resonant, vibrating through his knees. He reached out instinctively, brushing the edge of the tile. The warmth beneath had faded. No, it was cold now, the kind of cold that came from deep water, from trenches that never saw sunlight. The whispering returned faint, but unmistakable. Don't open. I remember? Crabs. His eyes widened. Mr. Krabs? He whispered aloud, as though the floor itself might answer. The hum cut off abruptly, and so the silence that followed was heavier than before. Even the bubbles had stopped rising. He sat there in the stillness, gripping his flashlight tightly. Every creak of the wood, every faint shift of current outside sounded amplified. Then came a sound he hadn't heard before, a slow metallic groan like rusted hinges turning underwater. It came from beneath the tiles. The flashlight flickered. SpongeBob took a shaky breath, forcing a smile he didn't feel. Well, that's perfectly normal, normal. He tried to laugh. The sound didn't come out right. It trembled halfway into a whisper. Something scraped beneath the floor, slow and deliberate. He stepped back, heart hammering. The hum returned, louder now, pulsing in uneven bursts. The tiles trembled faintly. He stumbled toward the door, but stopped halfway. He didn't know why, maybe curiosity again, or maybe something else. Something softer, deeper. The feeling that whatever was beneath the Krusty Krab wasn't trying to hurt him. It just wanted to be remembered. The hum softened again, returning to its slow rhythm. The whispering voices faded, replaced once more by that deep, peaceful vibration, like a heartbeat echoing through time. He took another slow step forward. The air felt warmer again, almost kind. He knelt one last time and laid his palm flat on the tiles. "It's okay," he said softly, voice trembling but gentle. "I'm listening." The floor pulsed once beneath his hand. Just once. Then stillness returned. The hum faded into the quiet breath of the ocean. For a moment, it almost felt as if the building itself sighed in relief. SpongeBob stayed there on the floor, hand resting on the tile, his reflection shimmering faintly in the thin sheen of seawater. And far below, deeper than any light it could reach, something vast stirred just once before falling silent again. The Krusty Krab slept, and the ocean dreamed with it. SpongeBob didn't know how long he stayed like that, one hand pressed against the cold tile, eyes fixed on the faint reflection of the ceiling lights above. His heartbeat finally slowed, sinking again with the rhythm of the ocean. It was quiet now, completely quiet. He could hear the faint whir of the clock above the register. Tick, tick, tick. Each sound felt like a reminder that time still existed, that he hadn't drifted too far into whatever strange tide had passed through the restaurant. He sat back slowly, pulling his hand away from the floor. There was a small, wet print where his palm had been, and for a strange moment, he thought he saw it pulse once, like the ghost of a heartbeat. But when he blinked, it was gone. He stood up, brushing dust from his square pants, and forced himself to breathe normally. The flashlight flickered again, its battery weak from hours of use. Its beam darted across the walls, over the tables, over the framed photos of Mr. Krab shaking claws with smiling customers. Everyone in those pictures looked happy. But now, under the dim light, their smiles looked hollow, stretched too wide, like the faded memories of a place that had forgotten how to laugh. SpongeBob turned away. He needed to go home. He needed rest. He glanced back one more time at the floor near the fryer. The crack had stopped widening. The light beneath it had vanished completely, leaving only darkness. Maybe, he told himself, it had just been a reflection. Maybe his tired eyes had imagined the glow, the bubbles, the whisper. "Yeah," he whispered. "That's all it was, just my imagination." He moved toward the door, flipping the lights one by one. Each click echoed softly through the still air. The main dining room faded into shadow, leaving only the faint bluish glow from outside. The sign above the door, Krusty Krab, gleamed faintly into the distance, its letters warped by the water's distortion. He paused at the threshold, hand on the door handle. He turned to look back one last time. It was strange the restaurant looked smaller somehow. Not physically, but older. Like the walls were heavier, the corners darker, the weight of years pressing in. He'd worked here for so long, cooked thousands of Krabby Patties, scrubbed these same floors hundreds of times. But tonight, it didn't feel like his kitchen anymore. It felt like something else's. Something ancient. Something patient. He took a deep breath. "Good night, Krusty Krab," he said quietly. And the moment the words left his mouth, the building creaked. A long, slow groan rolled through the beams, not loud, not threatening, but enough to make him stop mid-step. The floorboards under him flexed slightly, as if something deep below had shifted. He stared down, heart thudding softly. "You heard me?" he whispered. For a heartbeat, there was no reply. Then, faintly, so faintly, he almost doubted it, the hum returned. Not like before, not vibrating through the whole room, but small, local, directly beneath him. A single pulse, like a quiet answer. SpongeBob smiled weakly. "You're welcome," he said, and stepped outside into the dark. The door swung shut behind him, and the restaurant was silent again. Outside, the ocean stretched endlessly. The seafloor glowed faintly in the distance, the light of distant bioluminescent creatures drifting lazily through the current. SpongeBob turned toward his pineapple home, humming softly to himself a sleepy tune to calm his nerves. He didn't look back again. But if he had, he might have noticed the faint shimmer returning beneath the Krusty Krab's foundation, a soft, blue-green light tracing the outline of that hidden circle beneath the floor. And inside, the tiles around the fryer began to shift ever just enough to let a single air bubble escape. It floated upward, slow and graceful, before popping silently in the still water. The hum resumed again, rhythmic and slow, almost like breathing. The sound traveled downward through the coral foundation, past layers of rock and sand, into a hollow space that few had ever seen. Down there, beneath the restaurant, lay a vast stone chamber, ancient and half-collapsed, walls lined with carvings too eroded to read. In the center, a circular metal hatch sat embedded in the floor, its bolts fused with coral, its edges crusted with age. For centuries, it had remained sealed. But now, for the first time in decades, one of its bolts twitched. A tiny click echoed in the silence. A faint trail of bubbles drifted upward. And from somewhere far below the hatch, deeper than any sound should travel, came the softest echo. Not a word, not a whisper, just a sigh. A sound that might have been mistaken for the ocean's current, or for something dreaming beneath it. The sigh faded slowly, dissolving into the hum, until all that remained was stillness again. Above, the Krusty Krab stood silent and unmoving. Its sign creaked faintly in the tide, the letters shimmering in the moonlit water. Everything looked peaceful, normal. But deep below, the faint light pulsed again, rhythmic, steady, like a signal, like a heartbeat calling through the dark. And though no one could hear it, the sea was listening. The current outside grew slower, quieter, as if the entire ocean had leaned closer. The hum from beneath the Krusty Krab deepened one last time, long and low, before softening into a single tone that sounded almost content. Then nothing. Silence. The kind of silence that only comes when something ancient goes back to sleep. The next morning arrived soft and pale. A thin ribbon of sunlight filtered down through the water, painting the ocean floor in gold. The Krusty Krab sat quietly at the edge of the town, looking almost innocent, again in the daylight, like nothing strange had ever happened inside its walls. But SpongeBob felt the difference the moment he stepped through the front door. He stood still for a moment, spatula in hand, eyes drifting over the spotless tables and the neat rows of condiment bottles. Everything looked normal, but something was missing. The hum. It wasn't there. He tilted his head, listening. Usually, even in silence, there was a background life to the restaurant. The muffled thrum of the fryers cooling, the steady rhythm of bubbles from the grease traps, the distant moan of pipes behind the walls. But now it was too quiet. The kind of quiet that had weight. He took a slow breath and tried to shake off the feeling. Maybe he was just tired. Maybe last night had been a dream, and the glow beneath the floor had been nothing but imagination. He forced a smile, turning on the grill. The sound of sizzling oil filled the air, grounding him again. Another beautiful day in Bikini Bottom, he said softly to himself. And a perfect day to make Krabby Patties. The cheer in his voice was genuine, or at least he hoped it was. He worked through the morning rush with his usual energy, flipping patties, humming little tunes, greeting customers with wide-eyed excitement. But even as laughter filled the dining room, he couldn't shake the feeling that something below was listening. Every so often, when a spatula hit the grill just right, the echo beneath the floor would sound a little too deep. Not metal, not stone, something hollow. By the afternoon, his nerves had quieted a little. The restaurant buzzed with life again, and even Squidward's half-hearted eye rolls felt comforting. But Mr. Krabs had been different all day. He stayed in his office, door shut tight, muttering to himself. Every now and then, SpongeBob caught glimpses of him. Through the window, hunched over his desk, claws twitching, staring at a small, old-looking map spread across the table. When SpongeBob finally got a break, he peeked inside. "Hey, Mr. Krabs! Need me to—" "Don't!" Mr. Krabs barked, slamming a drawer shut so fast that the sound made SpongeBob flinch. He turned slowly, forcing a wide grin. Hey, lad. Didn't hear you come in. What can I do for you?" SpongeBob rubbed the back of his head. "Oh, nothing, sir. I just wanted to ask if you knew anything about, the floor." The grin froze on Mr. Krabs' face. "The floor?" "Yeah. There's a little, spot behind the fryer. I thought maybe it was a drain or something, but you didn't open it, did you? SpongeBob blinked. Open it? Oh, no, sir. Not really. I mean, it kind of looked like, well, like a hatch, maybe? But it's probably nothing. Mr. Krab's eyes twitched. He stepped closer, his voice dropping low. Lad, listen to me carefully. Whatever you saw under there, keep it closed. Aye? SpongeBob nodded slowly. Okay, Mr. Krabs. But why? What's down there? Mr. Krabs stared at him for a long moment. His claw tapped the desk once, twice, 3 times in old sailor's rhythm. Then he turned away, muttering under his breath. Some doors be built for keeping, not opening. SpongeBob frowned. I don't really understand. Krabs sighed and faced him again, his expression heavy. You don't need to, boyo. Just promise me you won't go poking around down there. Some things at the bottom of the sea are better left to sleep. And with that, he shuffled back into his office and shut the door. The rest of the day felt off balance. SpongeBob couldn't focus on anything, not the orders, not the laughter, not even Squidward's endless complaining. Every word Mr. Krabs had said echoed in his mind. Some doors be built for keeping. By the time the sun began to fade, that soft, familiar hum had returned, faint but real. SpongeBob froze mid-cleaning. The sound drifted through the floorboards again, not threatening, just steady. And this time, he could almost swear it was following his movements. When he swept near the fryer, it pulsed softly. When he moved away, it dimmed. When he stopped, it stopped. He knelt, pressing one ear against the tile. The hum responded immediately, rising and falling like breath. And though no words formed, there was something undeniably alive about it. SpongeBob whispered, You're back, aren't you? The hum deepened a single low note that lingered in the air. A chill crept down his spine. Not fear, not exactly. More like awe. He set his cleaning supplies aside, staring down at the faint cracks in the tile. His reflection stared back at him, eyes wide, full of wonder and something he didn't quite understand. He could still hear Mr. Krab's voice in his head. Some doors be built for keeping. But curiosity, as always, began to win. The sun had long since vanished from the ocean's surface. Soft blue shadows drifted across Bikini Bottom, carrying with them the quiet hum of the night. Streetlights glowed faintly in the distance, and a few jellyfish floated lazily by, their tendrils flickering like tiny lanterns in the dark. Inside the Krusty Krab, SpongeBob worked alone once again. He hummed as he wiped down the counter, his voice small in the vast quiet. Every squeak of his sponge echoed gently, swallowed by the deep, slow rhythm of the ocean outside. The hum from beneath the floor had returned in full. It wasn't constant, it pulsed, slow and steady, almost in time with SpongeBob's own heartbeat. It wasn't loud enough to be frightening. Instead, it filled the space with a strange comfort, like something deep below was breathing softly, making sure he wasn't alone. He knelt beside the fryer again. The same tiles, the same faint crack. But now he could see something glinting faintly beneath the surface, the edge of that round, rusted shape. He whispered, "Hello again." The hum deepened slightly in response. SpongeBob hesitated. He remembered what Mr. Krabs had said. Some doors be built for keeping. But that sentence had a hole in it, didn't it? Because not all doors were built for keeping, some were built for finding. SpongeBob, in his heart, had always been good at finding things. He took a deep breath and reached for his trusty spatula. The metal felt warm in his hand, familiar and reassuring. "Don't worry," he said softly, almost as if talking to the floor. "I just want to look." He pressed the spatula's edge between the tiles, prying gently. The grout cracked softly. Tiny bubbles escaped, rising into the air and popping without sound. The first tile came loose. Beneath it, a thin sheet of corroded metal gleamed dully. The second tile followed, and then the third. Soon, a circular outline was visible, the top of the hidden hatch. SpongeBob ran a gloved hand over it, brushing away years of grime and sand. The metal was smooth in places, ridged in others, and faintly covered in coral growth that had turned pale over time. At the center was a single handle, a round, rusted wheel. He leaned closer, reading the faint letters etched around it. Most were too faded to make out, but two words were barely visible. "Do not," he frowned. "Do not what?" The hum trembled beneath his palm. It didn't sound angry, more like a warning sigh. SpongeBob sat back on his heels, flashlight balanced on the edge of the counter, casting long shadows across the floor. The hatch shimmered faintly under the beam, every curve and dent glowing silver blue. He could see his reflection in it, now warped and wavering, like looking into deep water. A strange feeling filled him. Not fear, not even curiosity anymore. Something deeper, a sense of being seen. He whispered softly, "What are you?" The hum responded in kind, forming a slow, steady tone that rose and fell in 3 breaths, almost like it was trying to answer him. Then, just for a moment, he felt movement. Not beneath the hatch, but around it. The faintest tremor, like the floor itself, was shifting. A ripple passed through the room, so gentle it barely disturbed the crumbs on the counter. He held perfectly still. The hum softened again. The silence stretched, thick and endless. Then a sound broke through a quiet click. SpongeBob's eyes widened. He glanced down. The wheel handle at the center of the hatch had moved. Barely half an inch. But it had turned. He froze. His hands trembled slightly. No, that didn't happen. You didn't move. But the hatch didn't move again. It just sat there, quiet and still. He took a slow step back, heartbeat echoing in his chest. Maybe it's pressure. Yeah, old pipes maybe, or a current shift. But deep down, he knew it wasn't. That movement hadn't come from the sea. It had come from inside. SpongeBob turned off his flashlight and sat cross-legged on the floor, staring at the faint circle that marked the hatch. He didn't want to wake anything up, but he also couldn't bring himself to leave. The hum below remained slow and steady, a lullaby in the deep. Minutes passed, then hours. SpongeBob didn't notice the time anymore. The rhythm beneath the Krusty Krab had become hypnotic, gentle and endless, like breathing in sleep. He found himself matching its pace without meaning to. Breathe in. The hum rises. Breathe out. The hum falls. He felt calm, safe. Maybe, he thought, it wasn't dangerous at all. Maybe whatever was down there was lonely. He smiled faintly. It's okay. I'm here. He didn't expect an answer. But this time he got one. A single pulse vibrated through the floor, soft, careful, and deliberate, like a heartbeat responding to another. SpongeBob's eyes glimmered in the dim light. "See?" he whispered. "You can hear me." The hum replied just once more, slower this time. And somehow, even though it was only sound and vibration, SpongeBob understood. It wasn't saying stay away. It was saying wait. He nodded quietly. "Okay, I'll wait." And as he sat there, the Krusty Krab settled into its nightly silence. The moon drifted higher above the waves, casting silver light through the glass windows. Down below, the hum continued steady and low, echoing like a heartbeat buried beneath the sand. And somewhere far beneath the hatch, something turned in its sleep. Morning drifted into Bikini Bottom like a whisper. Soft light seeped through the coral canyons, turning the water a sleepy gold. The Krusty Krab sign creaked gently in the current, the letters glowing faintly as schools of tiny fish passed by. SpongeBob hadn't slept. He'd tried, he really had, but the hum had followed him home, faint and distant, like a melody he couldn't quite stop hearing. It wasn't loud enough to scare him. It simply lingered, patient and rhythmic, as if waiting for him to return. He sat at his kitchen table with a mug of kelp tea, staring blankly at the wall. Gary meowed softly, curling up at his feet. SpongeBob smiled down at him. "Don't worry, Gary, everything's fine. Just a silly little hatch." The snail blinked once, unimpressed, and slowly slid away. But SpongeBob's mind wasn't fine. It circled endlessly around that dark metal shape beneath the Krusty Krab, the wheel, the letters, the pulse that seemed to breathe in time with him. He could still feel it, even here, miles away. When he finally arrived for work, the restaurant looked the same. But as soon as he stepped through the door, the faint vibration greeted him like an old friend. He whispered, "Hi again." The hum deepened slightly just once, as if acknowledging him. SpongeBob smiled. He set to work frying patties, cleaning tables, greeting the few early customers. But all the while he felt that same quiet rhythm below, steady as a heartbeat. Even Squidward noticed. He squinted at the floor, frowning. "Do you hear that? Some kind of weird resonance?" SpongeBob froze. "You can hear it too?" "Unfortunately," Squidward muttered. "Sounds like someone snoring under the floor. Probably a plumbing issue or ghosts. Either way, I'm not staying late tonight." Before SpongeBob could answer, Mr. Krabs burst from his office, eyes darting wildly. "What was that you said, Squidward?" "Ghosts," Squidward said flatly. Krabs' face went pale, his claw twitched. "There'll be no ghosts in me restaurant. Just foundation problems, that's all." SpongeBob tilted his head. "Mr. Krabs, maybe I could take a look after closing? I'm pretty handy with—" "No," Krabs barked too quickly. "You'll do no such thing. Leave the floor be, lad. It's older than both of us. And better." He turned sharply and slammed his office door. Squidward raised an eyebrow. He's definitely hiding something. SpongeBob didn't reply. But his curiosity had reignited, stronger than ever. By nightfall, the streets of Bikini Bottom were quiet again. The water shimmered with a lazy current, and the moon hung high above, diffused through the deep. And inside, the Krusty Krab was dark, except for one light, SpongeBob's flashlight. He'd stayed late again, of course. He told himself it was for cleaning. But as he mopped, his eyes kept drifting back to the fryer, to that faint circle on the floor. The hum had changed tonight. It wasn't steady anymore. It pulsed in uneven bursts, 3 short beats, 1 long, then silence. Then again. He found himself counting the rhythm under his breath, as though it meant something. 3 short, 1 long, 3 short. He crouched beside the crack. The faint light had returned, barely visible, glowing softly beneath the metal edge. He leaned close. The warmth from last night was gone. Now it was cool, the kind of chill that seeps into bones, not from coldness, but from depth. He brushed his fingers across the surface. The hum reacted immediately. A faint tone rose from below, clearer this time. It almost sounded like a word. Not spoken, but formed. He listened closely. "Below," he gasped softly. "Below what?" The hum paused, then again, faintly. "Wait." SpongeBob's breath trembled. "I'm here." He knew how ridiculous it was, talking to the floor. But in the empty restaurant, the act felt natural, like a conversation between two things that shared the same quiet. The hatch stayed still, but the glow beneath it shifted slightly, forming thin, wavering lines that looked almost like writing. He squinted. Could it be letters? Symbols? The shapes shimmered and blurred, then faded again before he could focus. He sat back on the floor, hugging his knees. "You're trying to tell me something, aren't you?" The hum gave one long, gentle pulse. He smiled faintly. "Okay, I'll listen." He closed his eyes and focused on the rhythm. The room faded. The smell of the grill, the hum of the refrigerator, even the faint sway of the sign outside. All that remained was the sound. It rose and fell, low and deep, forming patterns too slow to be words, but too intentional to be random. SpongeBob could almost see them, shapes forming in his mind, circles, waves, spirals, all moving in rhythm. And at the center of it all, a single bright point pulsing softly. When he opened his eyes again, the flashlight beam was dimming. He looked down and realized the tiles beneath him were shifting. Not much, just enough to make a soft scraping sound. The circular outline of the hatch gleamed faintly, and the wheel in its center trembled. He leaned closer, whispering, "It's okay. You can open if you want." Nothing happened for a long moment. Then click. The wheel moved, slowly, precisely. It turned just an inch, then stopped. SpongeBob froze, heart pounding softly in his chest. He swallowed hard and placed both hands on the cold metal. The hum grew stronger, vibrating up through his palms into his arms and into his chest. And suddenly, for the first time, he heard something beyond the hum, faint far below. A soft, rhythmic splash, like water moving in a space that shouldn't exist. The sound was faint, almost uncertain. A soft lap, like the tide inside a shell. SpongeBob tilted his head, the beam of his flashlight trembling slightly in his hands. "Water?" he whispered. "But how could there be water under the floor?" He pressed his ear closer. The noise was steady now, gentle movement. Not violent or urgent, but deliberate. It almost sounded like something breathing through the ocean itself. Then came another sound. A tap, followed by another. SpongeBob froze, his reflection flickering faintly on the metal wheel. The taps came again, slow, rhythmic, like fingers against glass. He swallowed. "Hello?" The hum beneath the floor responded, one long note that seemed to hum right through his chest, and then faintly a glow began to pulse from the center of the hatch, deep green, the same shade as sea glass under moonlight. SpongeBob's curiosity overpowered his fear. He gripped the wheel and turned it gently. The metal was cold but moved smoothly, almost too smoothly for something buried and forgotten. As it rotated, the hum grew louder, harmonizing with the natural hush of the sea around them. One full turn, then another. On the third, the hatch gave a soft sigh, a release of pressure, and the faintest trail of bubbles drifted up through the floor's seams. SpongeBob sat back, heart fluttering. "Oh, barnacles!" The hatch didn't open, but the glow beneath it brightened enough to spill faint emerald light across the tiles. He leaned close again and whispered, "Are you, alive down there?" The hum paused for a long moment. Then came a single tone, high, clear, and sad. It wasn't random. It was an answer. SpongeBob's breathing slowed. He lowered the flashlight, and simply listened. The hum shifted, dipping low, then rising again, as though trying to form a melody. It reminded him of something. A lullaby. Not one he knew, but one he felt. Familiar in the way old dreams sometimes are, just beyond memory's reach. He hummed back softly, matching the tone. The hum responded, softer now, almost pleased. For a long, quiet minute, SpongeBob and the sound beneath the hatch sang together, two voices separated by layers of time and pressure, one curious, one ancient. Then, without warning, a shadow moved beneath the floor. It was faint, just a dark shape, drifting slowly past the cracks. But it was enough to make the light flicker. SpongeBob's song caught in his throat. Ah! He pressed his face to the tiles, squinting into the glow. The shadow was gone, but the water beneath was no longer still. Tiny currents twisted beneath the hatch, carrying particles that shimmered faintly like dust in sunlight, and within those currents, something glowed brighter than the rest. He blinked. It looked like an eye, round, faintly luminous, golden green, and it was looking directly up at him. SpongeBob didn't scream. He didn't even move. The gaze wasn't angry or hostile. It was patient, curious, ancient. He whispered, barely audible, "You're not supposed to be here, are you?" The hum faded slowly, replaced by silence so deep it pressed against his chest. The glow dimmed until only the faintest trace of green remained. And then, just as he thought it was gone, something changed. A voice, not loud, not even fully formed, rose from below, carried by the faint vibration of the floor. "Not beneath, alone." SpongeBob's eyes widened. The voice was soft, layered, distorted by water, but the meaning was clear. He leaned closer. "Who are you?" No answer, only silence. Then faintly, the hatch began to move again. Not the wheel this time, but the entire circle of metal, rotating with a slow, groaning sound. He scrambled backward as the light flared once more, brighter than before, spilling across the walls and ceiling. The water beneath swirled violently for a moment, then settled. And just like that, the hatch was still again. The glow vanished. The hum stopped. The Krusty Krab was silent. SpongeBob sat on the floor, chest rising and falling, the last echoes of the vibration fading through his arms. He glanced toward the door to Mr. Krab's office. For a brief moment, he thought he heard movement, a faint rustle, the creak of a floorboard. But when he turned, the door was closed, the light inside gone. He whispered to the darkness, "Mr. Krabs, what's under here?" The ocean outside gave no answer. He stood slowly, brushing dust from his square pants, and shone his flashlight once more at the hatch. It looked perfectly ordinary again. No glow, no hum. Just cold metal, older than the restaurant itself. And yet, something inside him knew it was still awake. The faintest bubble drifted up from the edge of the hatch and burst silently against the tile. SpongeBob crouched again, resting a hand gently on the surface. "I'll find out," he whispered. "I'll find out what you are." The floor gave a single, soft thrum in response, almost affectionate. Then once again, silence. SpongeBob turned off his flashlight, letting the darkness reclaim the room. The only light left came from the faint reflection of the moon through the porthole window, spreading ripples of silver across the counter and floor. He sat there for a long time, motionless, quiet, listening. Far above, the ocean moved softly against the night. Far below, something else moved too. Between them sat SpongeBob SquarePants, the hum of the deep, now a secret only he and the sea shared. And deep beneath the Krusty Krab, the unseen thing waited, eyes glowing faintly once more, patient as time itself. The next morning came slowly, as if the sun itself hesitated to rise over Bikini Bottom. Light drifted through the water like old dust in an attic, soft and dim. The town moved in lazy silence. Fish opened shops half-heartedly. Bubbles floated without purpose. And beneath it all, somewhere deep under the sand and coral, something ancient had begun to stir. SpongeBob felt it before he understood it. He woke with the feeling that someone had whispered to him while he slept. Not words exactly, more like echoes, shapes of sound that left an aftertaste of meaning. His pillow was cold, and Gary was perched on the nightstand, staring at him with wide eyes. "Morning, Gare Bear," SpongeBob murmured, rubbing his face. His voice sounded distant even to him. Gary meowed softly, a low sound that almost trembled. SpongeBob blinked. "You heard it too?" Of course Gary didn't answer, but for a moment, SpongeBob could have sworn the walls of his pineapple shifted, the faintest vibration, like something vast moving through the seabed miles below. He stood and looked out the window. Everything looked normal. Jellyfish drifting, Patrick snoring in his rock, Squidward watering his garden of despair. But under it all, SpongeBob could feel the rhythm again. That hum. It wasn't coming from the Krusty Krab anymore. It was everywhere. When SpongeBob arrived at work, Mr. Krabs was already pacing near the register, muttering under his breath. His eyes darted from the floor to the walls, then toward the door. "Morning, Mr. Krabs," SpongeBob chirped, though his smile wavered slightly. Krabs jumped. "Ah, SpongeBob! You're early! Too early! Don't you ever sleep?" "Sometime," SpongeBob said softly, glancing toward the kitchen. "But I heard something." Krab's claws froze mid-gesture. "Heard what?" "The same sound, sir. The hum. Only it wasn't just here this time." Mr. Krabs stared at him for a long moment. Then he looked away, his face tightening. "It's just the pipes, lad. Sea currents play tricks on your head if you listen too hard." "But drop it," Krabs snapped. The echo of his shout carried strangely through the room, as though the walls swallowed it rather than reflected it. SpongeBob blinked, startled by the tone. Krabs had yelled before, sure, but never with fear hiding behind the words. Krabs rubbed his claw over his face and sighed. "Lad, some things under this ocean be best left forgotten." SpongeBob didn't argue, but the words stayed with him all day, circling in his mind like small fish around a reef. That night, he dreamed. The dream began in silence. Then came the sound of waves, slow, endless, moving backward. The sea wasn't blue, but black, filled with shimmering threads of silver light, twisting upward from the depths. SpongeBob floated above an immense chasm. He couldn't see the bottom, only a faint glow far below, pulsing like the heartbeat of the world. He drifted lower, arms outstretched, as if the water itself was guiding him down. The glow grew brighter, forming a circle, an enormous, ancient ring embedded in the seabed. Its edge was carved with symbols older than coral, older than memory. At the center of the ring, the light pulsed again. And then he heard it. Voices. Not one, but many, soft and layered, speaking in a language that wasn't quite words. They didn't come from outside him. They came from within the water, vibrating through every current, every ripple. He understood only fragments. The sea remembers, and the buried to feed. The builder sleeps beneath the tide. SpongeBob reached toward the glow. The moment his hand brushed the light, the voices fell silent. And in the sudden quiet, he saw something vast move beneath the surface. A shape so enormous he couldn't comprehend it. Eyes like molten gold blinked once, staring up through the darkness. He gasped and woke up. The room was still, but the hum, that same low vibration, filled the air again, soft and patient. He turned on the lamp. Its light flickered slightly. Gary was gone. "Gary?" SpongeBob whispered, looking around. "Buddy?" A faint sound came from the living room. He followed it slowly, each step sinking into the quiet like walking through a dream. When he reached the couch, he stopped. Gary sat there staring at the wall. His eye stalks were tilted downward, following a faint, glowing line running along the floorboards. It pulsed gently, the same green light from the Krusty Krab. SpongeBob knelt beside it, his reflection rippling in the faint glow. "It followed me home," he breathed. The light brightened slightly, and for the first time he noticed something else. Tiny, shifting symbols etched into the glow itself. They weren't letters exactly, more like shapes drawn by the current. And though he couldn't read them, a part of him somehow knew what they meant. The sea never forgets. He reached out a trembling hand. "Show me," he whispered. The light responded, spreading in slow spirals across the floor like a blooming jellyfish. It twisted and curved, forming faint images, a storm, a ship, a deep trench lined with coral bones. And there, at the center of it all, stood the Krusty Krab. Not as it was now, but older, its walls worn, its foundation cracked, and beneath it, the faint outline of the hatch glowing brighter than ever. The images on SpongeBob's floor drifted like mist. Every pulse of green light revealed another moment that wasn't supposed to exist. He saw the Krusty Krab before it was the Krusty Krab, just a hollow shell of wood perched on a rocky mound. The sign above it wasn't there yet. Instead, a rusted iron plaque bore 3 words written in old sea script. SpongeBob couldn't read them, but when the glow touched the letters, the meaning pressed into his mind like a whisper. The trench outpost. He blinked, breath catching. The image shifted again. Now he saw silhouettes, figures of fish he didn't recognize, wearing heavy diving harnesses and old-fashioned helmets that gleamed faintly in the light. They moved slowly, setting tools, anchoring beams, lowering metal drums into the seabed. Around them, the water shimmered with disturbed silt and the pale glow of plankton drawn to the noise. SpongeBob leaned closer to the vision. What were they building? As if hearing him, the light answered. The view sank lower, beneath the half-built structure, to a circular pit carved into the rock. In the center of that pit sat a small metal disc, the same hatch. But it was open. Inside, a vast darkness pulsed like a sleeping lung. Threads of blue light drifted in and out of it, each one vanishing into the gloom below. The workers stood at the rim, lowering chains into the abyss, whispering among themselves. Then something moved inside the pit. The water shook. The vision blurred. The glow on SpongeBob's floor flared, and for an instant, he saw a single enormous fin pass through the darkness. The figures above it stumbled back, helmets flashing in panic. One dropped a lantern. It tumbled down, vanishing into the black. The next moment, the vision went white. SpongeBob shielded his eyes. When the light faded, the scene had changed again. Now the outpost was abandoned. The wooden frame had decayed, half buried in sand. The hatch was sealed. Around it, coral had begun to grow, curling like protective hands. Years, decades, maybe centuries, passed in seconds as coral thickened, shells formed, and seaweed tangled over the ruins. Finally, the familiar shape of the Krusty Krab rose in its place, boards rebuilt, sign hammered in, fryers and counters installed where the outpost once stood. The vision froze there. SpongeBob stared, heart pounding softly, in the still water of his living room. So the Krusty Krab wasn't built. It was rebuilt. The glow pulsed once in confirming. He sat back, trying to breathe evenly. Mr. Krabs? He must know? The line of light along the floor dimmed, shrinking into a single circle that hovered near his feet, faint, pulsing. He watched as it drew itself into a new shape, a spiral that curved inward until it vanished to a single point. And then softly, the hum returned. It wasn't loud. It didn't fill the room. It simply appeared, like a note remembered after years of silence. SpongeBob felt it beneath his ribs, in his teeth, behind his eyes. It wasn't frightening. It was sad. He whispered, "You're remembering, aren't you? The sea. It remembers everything." The hum deepened, and the faint green circle lifted off the floor, floating gently into the water. It drifted toward the window, leaving a faint shimmer trail. SpongeBob followed, pressing his hands against the glass. Outside, the world looked untouched, but as his eyes adjusted, he began to see other lights. Small, pulsing dots scattered across the seabed. Dozens of them, then hundreds. Each glowed for a moment, then dimmed again, like the ocean was blinking in its sleep. He gasped softly. Memories? He could feel them. Old stories, forgotten structures, entire worlds buried under silt and time. Every pulse was a place the sea hadn't let go of. The hum rose again, forming faint patterns in the glass. When SpongeBob leaned close, he saw ripples of language, symbols made of vibration. They shifted slowly into meaning. One wakes the rest. SpongeBob stepped back. One wakes the rest? Before he could ask more, a sound like distant thunder rolled through the water. The lights outside flickered in sequence, stretching toward the horizon. Something far below Bikini Bottom had stirred. The glow on SpongeBob's floor flickered weakly, then collapsed in on itself like a dying ember. The house grew still. He whispered into the silence. "What did I wake up, boy?" No answer came, only the slow creak of his pineapple walls adjusting to the shifting current. He sat there for a long time, staring out at the dim trail of fading lights. Somewhere far away, deep beneath the sand and coral, an old door that had been sealed for centuries groaned softly against the pressure. It did not open, but it no longer slept. By the next afternoon, Bikini Bottom felt slightly wrong. Not broken, just out of step, as if reality itself had shifted half a beat behind its normal rhythm. The bubbles in the streets rose more slowly. The coral's colors seemed muted, touched with gray. Even the jellyfish in the lagoon floated lower, their tendrils brushing the sand as if weighed down by invisible threads. SpongeBob noticed first while sweeping the floor of the Krusty Krab. Each time he pushed the mop forward, the faintest vibration echoed through the handle. It was the hum again, gentler than before, but everywhere, hiding inside sound itself. He paused, resting his chin on the mop. "You're humming through everything now, huh?" he said softly. The reply came not as noise, but as a tremor, barely enough to ruffle the surface of his mop water. Ripples spread outward, circling each other like tiny whirlpools before fading. A memory. SpongeBob crouched. Beneath the thin layer of soap bubbles, images shimmered for an instant. Faint silhouettes of coral towers, shapes of creatures long gone, an outline of the same metal hatch buried under different sand. Then they disappeared. He stood slowly, gaze drifting toward the back of the restaurant where Mr. Krab's office door stood closed. Light flickered beneath it, the same sea-green shade as before. He hesitated only a moment before knocking. "Mr. Krabs?" No answer. "Sir, I think something's wrong with the water again." The door opened a crack. One large crimson eye peered through. "There's nothing wrong, lad. Get back to your work." "But the floor. Back to work." The door slammed shut, rattling the frame. SpongeBob stood there, mop dripping onto the tiles until Squidward's dry voice drifted from the counter. "Maybe he's allergic to secrets." SpongeBob turned. "Do you feel it too, Squidward?" "Humming?" Squidward sighed. "I feel a migraine coming on. Probably from standing too close to you." He tried to resume polishing a glass, but his movements were sluggish, distracted. After a moment, he set it down and rubbed his temples. "Okay, fine. Something's weird. The floor vibrates like a bass drum, and I swear the coffee machine whistled in tune with it." SpongeBob's eyes widened. "It's spreading." "Great," Squidward muttered. "Just what I needed. A haunted workplace and an overexcited sponge." But beneath the sarcasm, there was unease. Even as Squidward's normally crisp voice had a tremor, as though the water around them carried a resonance that touched every word. That night, SpongeBob walked home through a city half asleep. The glow from the streetlights flickered in slow rhythm with the sea's pulse. Every surface, windows, shells, sand, seemed to breathe. When he passed the chum bucket, he stopped. The sign was dark, but faint light leaked from the cracks of the door. Inside, shadows moved, slow, deliberate, mechanical. He peeked through the window. Plankton sat before a huge screen of old monitors, each showing blurry sonar maps and shifting ocean currents. He looked exhausted but focused. The largest screen displayed a deep-sea trench marked with glowing symbols identical to those SpongeBob had seen in his living room. Plankton spoke without looking up. "You feel it too, don't you?" SpongeBob blinked. "The hum?" Plankton finally turned, one antenna twitching. "It started 2 nights ago. Every machine in Bikini Bottom picked up the same frequency, even the kelp radios. I traced it," he tapped the screen, "to beneath the Krusty Krab." SpongeBob's heart thudded softly. "The hatch?" Plankton nodded. "There's something ancient down there. The sea's memory, maybe, or its pulse. And now it's leaking." He zoomed in on the map. Tiny waves of light spread outward from a single point under the restaurant, just like ripples on the surface of water. Whatever it is, it's awakening. SpongeBob stared at the map. The ripples glowed in rhythm with his own heartbeat. "What if it's not angry?" he asked quietly. "What if it's just remembering?" Plankton smirked faintly. "That's worse. Memories are contagious." The lights on the monitors dimmed suddenly, flickering between static and that same sea-green hue. A low tone filled the lab, deeper than any machine could produce. The walls themselves seemed to resonate. Plankton's single eye widened. "It's transmitting again." SpongeBob stepped closer to the screen. Amid the static, faint images began to appear. Spirals, currents, shapes of coral, and then faces. Not clear ones, but impressions, like the ocean trying to recall what it once contained. Each face shimmered for a moment before fading, replaced by another. And each time one disappeared, SpongeBob felt something tug gently in his chest, as if the sea expected him to recognize them. When the images faded completely, the tone lingered. Low, patient, almost like a heartbeat slowing to rest. Plankton exhaled shakily. That wasn't a signal. That was remembrance. SpongeBob looked down at his hands. They glowed faintly green, the same color as the hatch. The light faded as quickly as it came. but he felt the pulse remain deep in his skin. He whispered, "It's inside all of us now." Plankton frowned. "Then it's already too late." Outside, the sea stirred. The sand along the road shifted in soft waves, as if the ground itself had taken a breath. Somewhere far below, a chorus of tiny clicks and hums rose from the deep, old sounds returning after centuries of silence. SpongeBob turned toward the distant outline of the Krusty Krab. Its windows glowed faintly, alive with soft green veins of light that pulsed in time with the ocean's new rhythm. He whispered, "The sea is remembering, through us." And in the quiet that followed, Bikini Bottom exhaled a long, slow sigh that seemed to come from everywhere at once. That night, SpongeBob couldn't sleep. The ocean outside his window was alive with whispers, soft, rhythmic, and endless. It wasn't language exactly. It was remembrance, the kind that moves without sound, the way light moves through water. He sat up slowly, gazing through his porthole. The glow from beneath the Krusty Krab reached all the way to his street, now a faint green shimmer pulsing through the sand like veins under translucent skin. It should have been frightening, but it wasn't. There was something oddly peaceful about it, like the ocean was dreaming. He was part of it. SpongeBob got out of bed and stepped outside. The night felt different, thicker, almost like walking through syrup. Each step stirred faint ripples of light under his feet. Jellyfish drifted above the rooftops, silent and slow, their tendrils leaving trails of luminescence that curved through the dark like cursive writing. He whispered, "Are you remembering too?" The nearest jellyfish turned toward him, its bell glowing faintly in response. Then it pulsed once and floated away down toward the Krusty Krab. SpongeBob followed. When he reached the restaurant, he found the front door slightly open. The closed sign still hung there, rocking gently in the current, though no current was moving it. Inside, everything was still. The light from the deep hatch had filled the entire floor now, a delicate green mist curling up through the cracks in the wood. It wasn't smoke, it was memory, the sea's own breath rising from its ancient lungs. He walked toward it slowly. The closer he got, the louder that low hum became, though not in his ears. It resonated inside his ribs, a vibration more felt than heard. He whispered, "I'm not afraid." The light pulsed in reply. And then, as if triggered by his words, the mist began to take shape. It twisted upward, swirling like ink in water until it formed the faint outline of a coral archway, ancient, eroded, and familiar. SpongeBob blinked. It was the same archway that used to stand at Goo Lagoon before storms and time had worn it away. Through the archway shimmered a vision, faint at first, then clearer. The Krusty Krab, but not as it was, older, made of rough coral stone, sign carved from a ship's hull. The sky above was darker, tinted violet. The water shimmered with streaks of gold. He was watching the restaurant as it might have been hundreds of years ago. Fish moved inside, not ones he recognized, tall, thin, with eyes that glowed faintly. They spoke in slow, drawn-out tones that sounded like the sea itself exhaling. And in the center of it all stood a single object, the same hatch, perfectly new, sealed tight, its surface covered in glowing runes that shifted and swam like living ink. SpongeBob reached toward it instinctively, and as his hand passed through the vision, it rippled and changed. The ancient restaurant dissolved into sand, and he was suddenly underwater in a vast plain of coral ruins. Above him, enormous shadows moved whale-like shapes, gliding silently. Below, the hatch sat embedded in the seabed, surrounded by circles of faintly glowing shells. Each shell hummed softly, perfectly in tune. Then a voice echoed through the water, not in words, but in meaning. You opened the memory. You let the sea remember itself. SpongeBob turned slowly. He couldn't tell where the voice came from. It was everywhere, part of the current. What are you? He whispered. The hum deepened. We are what you forgot. The stories buried beneath your laughter. He took a step closer to the hatch. Did we build this? The water shimmered again, revealing faint images, builders with fins and eyes that glowed like lanterns, carving coral into spirals, singing as they worked. Their voices weren't songs, but currents, moving stones with resonance alone. They built to remember, the voice said. And when they forgot, the sea kept the memory for them. SpongeBob placed his hand on the hatch. The surface was cool, pulsing faintly under his touch. Images flickered through his mind, fragments of time not his own. A coral city, a storm that tore it apart, a single survivor burying the last memory beneath layers of silt. Then silence. He opened his eyes. The vision faded, and he was back in the Krusty Krab, but the floor beneath him still glowed faintly, and his handprint shimmered where he had touched the hatch. He stepped back, heart steady but full. You remember everything, don't you? He murmured. The hum softened as if in agreement. And then, quietly, a single bubble rose from the crack in the floor. It floated upward, catching the light until it touched the ceiling and inside it. For just a moment, SpongeBob saw something. Himself, standing where he was now, but older, quieter, still looking down at the hatch. A memory of the future. The bubble burst. SpongeBob exhaled slowly. Outside, the ocean's glow faded back to its normal deep blue. The hum drifted away, settling into the distance like the end of a lullaby. He turned toward the door and whispered, "Good night, old sea." As he stepped outside, the sand beneath his feet was warm again. The water felt gentle, peaceful. But far below, deep beneath the Krusty Krab, the hatch pulsed once more, a heartbeat in the dark, patient and eternal. And somewhere in that vast, hidden memory, the sea whispered one last thought to itself. The story continues when the surface sleeps. The following days passed like hours in a dream. Bikini Bottom had become quieter than anyone could explain. The laughter that usually spilled from SpongeBob's pineapple house at dawn no longer echoed across the street. The sound of the Krusty Krab's bell, once bright, sharp, alive, now rang dull and distant, as if traveling through miles of deep water. And at night, that faint sea-green glow never faded anymore. It wasn't menacing, but it wasn't peaceful either. It was watching. SpongeBob noticed it most clearly when he closed his eyes. The moment he drifted near sleep, the light followed him inward, painting slow waves of green behind his eyelids, illuminating dreams that didn't feel like his own. Sometimes he saw the hatch. Sometimes he saw faces, faint outlines, glowing softly like jellyfish drifting just out of reach. And sometimes he saw nothing at all, only the endless rhythm of the sea breathing through his mind. But that morning, when he opened his eyes, he realized something new. The glow was stronger not just in the sand, not just in the walls of his home, but in the water itself. It shimmered in the distance, rising from the ocean floor like mist. And beneath it, he could feel a pull, a deep, slow gravity, the kind that draws not the body, but the soul. When SpongeBob arrived at work, Mr. Krabs was already waiting outside the Krusty Krab, pacing anxiously. His eyes, usually sharp and greedy, looked tired, rimmed with faint green light. "You feel it too, lad?" Krabs asked without turning. SpongeBob nodded. It's getting stronger, Krabs grunted. Aye. The glow comes from under the restaurant now, down deep. I went to the basement last night, and the floor was... He paused, his claws twitching. It was breathing. SpongeBob tilted his head. Breathing? Krabs' voice dropped low, like a great chest, rising and falling. And the hum? It's louder every hour. They both stood in silence, listening. The hum wasn't faint anymore. It was a low vibration that lived in the bones of the building, in the glass, in the grill, in every nail that held the place together. Sir, SpongeBob whispered. Maybe it's calling us. Krabs looked at him sharply. Calling us? Boy, that's the kind of talk that gets a sailor eaten alive. But his voice faltered because even he knew it wasn't just talk. Behind them, Squidward arrived, his face unusually pale. You two hearing that noise, too? Because if this is another one of your weird cook-off gimmicks, I quit. SpongeBob shook his head slowly. It's not us, Squidward. It's the sea. The sea? Squidward said dryly. Oh, wonderful. Next, the sand will start singing. But even as he spoke, he glanced toward the floor and saw the faintest pulse of light move beneath it. His sarcasm withered. Oh, no. That evening, when the restaurant closed, SpongeBob stayed behind. He waited until Krabs had retreated to his office and Squidward had drifted home. The lights dimmed, leaving only the soft emerald shimmer seeping from the floorboards. He knelt beside the counter, placing his hand flat against the wood. It was warm, and with each passing second, it grew warmer. Then, very slowly, he heard a sound rising beneath it. Not the hum, not the pulse. It was something else. Voices. Faint, overlapping, whispering through the cracks. He pressed his ear against the floor. The voices grew clearer, not loud, but impossibly near. They didn't speak words he could understand, yet somehow he felt them, like the way you understand the tone of a song without knowing the lyrics. A calm, ancient rhythm pulsed through the murmurs. Not a warning, not a threat. An invitation. SpongeBob whispered, You want me to come back, don't you? The glow beneath his hand pulsed in response. And then, for the briefest instant, he saw something, a flash of light, like the ocean floor opening to reveal a vast chamber, walls of coral, spirals of light, and a single massive shell glowing brighter than the sun. Then darkness again. SpongeBob sat back, heart beating slowly but hard. He stared at his palm and was glowing faintly, the light threading through the lines of his skin like veins of green fire. He didn't know if he should be afraid or awed. Maybe both. Outside, the water pressed softly against the restaurant windows. It wasn't restless anymore. It was waiting. He didn't sleep that night. He walked to Goo Lagoon instead, where the sea met the sand in long, slow waves. The water there was glowing too gentle, swirls of green that turned the surface into glass. He stood ankle-deep in it, looking down. The reflection that stared back at him wasn't his own. It was the same coral plain he'd seen in the vision, vast and silent, stretching into infinity. And far away, at the edge of that dreamlike horizon, he saw something move, something luminous, rising from the depths, like a ghost of the ocean's heart. The glow in the deep was no longer just beneath the Krusty Krab. It was everywhere now, and whatever it was coming closer. By the next morning, Bikini Bottom had changed again. The sea light that once shimmered only near the Krusty Krab now ran through the whole town, faint veins of green and blue threading through the sand like roots beneath a forest floor. Buildings breathed. Windows trembled softly as if remembering winds they'd never felt. and the air, the very water everyone lived in, felt thick with a kind of quiet music. SpongeBob stood outside his house watching the glow drift between coral and shell. It wasn't frightening anymore. It felt like a lullaby being sung by the sea itself. He whispered, "You're remembering louder now, aren't you?" And somewhere far away, as if from the ocean floor, the hum answered, low, slow, endless. Across the street, Patrick was sitting on his rock, half asleep, and covered in that faint glow. He squinted at SpongeBob. "Hey, buddy," he mumbled. "Is it morning or dream time?" SpongeBob smiled softly. "Maybe both." Patrick nodded like that made perfect sense. "Cool." He looked down at his hands. They were faintly luminous, the glow pulsing gently in time with his slow heartbeat. "I had a weird dream last night," Patrick said. "I was floating in the middle of the ocean, but the ocean was looking back at me." SpongeBob's eyes widened slightly. "Did it say anything?" Patrick frowned, thinking hard. "Yeah, it said, 'We remember.' And then I woke up." He looked confused for a moment, then grinned. "But it was a nice dream." SpongeBob looked toward the horizon. "I think the sea is showing everyone its dreams." When SpongeBob arrived at work later, he found Squidward standing by the counter, eyes half closed, clarinet in hand. The restaurant was empty. No customers, no sound except the soft hum of the deep and the faint music rising from the floorboards. Squidward wasn't really playing, at least not on purpose. His clarinet moved on its own slow, smooth notes that rose and fell with the pulse of the glow beneath them. It wasn't a melody he'd ever practiced. It was older, simpler. Something like the sound of waves moving through the coral caves. He opened his eyes briefly, saw SpongeBob watching, and said quietly, "I can't stop it." "Stop what?" "The song. My hands keep playing, even when I try not to." SpongeBob approached slowly. "Maybe the sea is using you to sing." Squidward exhaled, looking at the clarinet. "Figures. I finally get noticed by something ancient and powerful, and it wants background music." But then his tone softened. "Still, it's beautiful, isn't it?" The music filled the restaurant like drifting light, peaceful, sad, infinite. Each note echoed faintly, as if bouncing between layers of time. And as it played, the glow beneath the floor brightened slightly, curling upward around the tables like mist. SpongeBob whispered, "It's listening." That night, the hum became a song. It wasn't just a vibration anymore. It had rhythm. A slow heartbeat beneath the sea. Every few seconds it pulsed, and with each pulse, the sand glowed brighter. Fish in the street stopped to watch, speaking in hushed voices. The water felt alive, like they were walking through the bloodstream of something vast and ancient. A group of jellyfish drifted through the sky above the Krusty Krab, their bells glowing in unison with the hum. They moved in patterns, swirling and weaving, forming symbols that flickered faintly before dissolving. SpongeBob stood outside the restaurant, his hands folded in front of him. He could feel the pull now, stronger than ever, like the sea was gently calling him deeper, asking him to listen closer. He looked toward the dark horizon. For a second he thought he saw movement. A massive shadow far below, shifting within the lights. Something enormous, glowing from within, turning slowly as if waking up from centuries of sleep. His breath caught. He didn't feel fear. He felt recognition. The next day, Mr. Krabs didn't open the restaurant. He stood in his office instead, staring at a chest of old charts and maps, ones he hadn't looked at in years. Some were drawn on driftwood, some etched into thin coral slabs. Each showed the same thing, a spiral trench directly beneath the Krusty Krab. At the center of every spiral, a single mark, a symbol identical to the one carved into the hatch. SpongeBob entered quietly. "Sir?" Krabs looked up, his face half lit by the glow from below. "You know what's down there, lad?" SpongeBob shook his head. Krab's eyes narrowed, not in greed this time, but something closer to awe. "That glow you see? It ain't just light. It's old power. Older than the sea itself, some say." He traced a trembling claw over one of the coral maps. "This place, this whole town, sits atop what used to be called the Heart Trench. A fissure so deep, the currents themselves couldn't escape." He looked up, his voice low and grave. "And now it's waking again." SpongeBob stood still, listening to the hum beneath the floor. It wasn't just sound anymore. It was language, whispering at the edges of his thoughts. The glow pulsed once, steady and calm. He whispered, "Then maybe it's not waking to destroy anything, Mr. Krabs. Maybe it's waking to remember what it once was." Krabs didn't answer. His gaze stayed fixed on the map, claws trembling slightly as if he too could feel the rhythm of the deep. Outside, the hum deepened once more, and for the first time, the sea itself seemed to breathe in. That night, the dreams began to spread. Not as nightmares, not as visions of fear, but as shared moments, flowing between the minds of everyone in Bikini Bottom like a soft tide. It started with Patrick. He dreamt he was standing on a beach that had no sky. Above him, only water, an endless ceiling of glowing blue currents. The sand beneath his feet shimmered like glass. He bent down and touched it. The moment his fingers met the sand, the world around him rippled outward like the surface of a pond. The ripples became patterns, circles within circles, and in the distance, he saw SpongeBob standing at the center of one. SpongeBob smiled faintly. "You made it, Patrick." Patrick blinked. "Where are we?" SpongeBob looked around. Inside the memory. They both turned. Behind them, the glow was rising, not from torches, not from stars, but from the sea itself. Waves moved upward instead of outward, curling into spirals of green light that painted the dark in living color. Patrick whispered, "It feels like we're underwater inside a dream." SpongeBob nodded. "Maybe the dream's been underwater all along." The two friends stood there quietly, watching the sea lift its own light toward them, and for the first time in all their adventures, neither laughed nor shouted nor ran. They simply stood still, listening to the sound of the ocean remembering itself. Elsewhere in his home, Squidward slept with his clarinet across his chest. The same dream took him too. He found himself sitting on a smooth coral ledge, his clarinet glowing faintly in his hands. Below him stretched a vast city, ancient, silent, carved from shell and stone. Towers of coral reached upward, glimmering like candlelight beneath the endless sea. He looked down at the instrument in his lap. Without meaning to, he began to play. The sound was low, soft, and mournful, and as the notes drifted outward, they rippled through the city below like gentle rain. Windows flickered to life. Shapes moved behind them. Faces appeared old, luminous, forgotten. Each one turned upward toward him. They didn't speak. They didn't move. They only listened. Squidward's hands shook, but he kept playing. For once, his music didn't sound lonely. It sounded eternal. When he woke, the faint sound of that melody lingered in the air, as if the dream hadn't quite let go. He stared at his hands. They glowed faintly green in the darkness, and he whispered, "Maybe I was never playing alone." By the next morning, everyone in town felt the same strange calm. No one could explain it. They only knew they had dreamed of light and waves and voices that didn't frighten them. Voices that sounded like lullabies. Even Mr. Krabs looked different. He sat outside the Krusty Krab, staring into the sand. When SpongeBob approached, Krabs spoke softly, as if still half asleep. "I saw her," he murmured. SpongeBob frowned. "Who?" "The sea. Not just the water, the memory of it. She spoke to me." SpongeBob crouched beside him. "What did she say?" Krab's claws trembled slightly. "She said, 'The heart beneath you never stopped beating. You just stopped listening.'" He looked out toward the horizon, where the green shimmer was strongest. "All these years, I thought I built this place on luck. Turns out I built it on a pulse that never died." SpongeBob nodded slowly. "Then maybe we were always supposed to be here." That evening, when the town grew quiet again, SpongeBob returned to Goo Lagoon. The glow there had intensified. The waves no longer looked like water. They looked like ribbons of light folding in on themselves, forming slow spirals that descended downward into darkness. SpongeBob stepped closer to the edge. The pull was stronger now. He could feel it in his chest, like the sea was tugging gently at the rhythm of his heart. And this time he didn't resist. He waded into the glowing water. The moment he submerged, sound disappeared. There was no current, no temperature, only endless calm. The light around him swirled slowly, each ribbon of green carrying faint shapes, jellyfish, coral, fragments of cities, outlines of things that used to be alive. And in the center of it all, far below, he saw the glow's true source. It wasn't the hatch, not anymore. It was something beneath even that. A slow-turning sphere of light breathing, pulsing, alive. He descended toward it, weightless, eyes wide. It looked like a heart made of coral and glass, its surface etched with the same spiral symbol he'd seen carved into the hatch. It pulsed once, and the pulse echoed through every corner of the sea, through the sand, through the sky above Bikini Bottom, through the dreams of everyone sleeping. For one moment, the whole ocean was one heartbeat. And SpongeBob heard the voice again, not outside, but inside his mind. "Do you see now, little one?" He nodded slowly. "Yes. You live upon our memory. You breathe it. You laugh because we once sang. You build because we once dreamed. He reached out toward the glowing heart. And you're waking up again." "No," said the voice, its tone soft and vast. "We are not waking. We are remembering through you." The light brightened, and for a brief instant, SpongeBob saw everything the ocean's past, its beginnings, the coral kingdoms that came before time, the creatures that sang light into being. Then, as suddenly as it began, the light faded. He was standing back on the shore, the waves calm again, the glow dim but steady. In the distance, the Krusty Krab shimmered faintly, like a lantern under the sea. SpongeBob looked down at his hands, the glow still there, but softer now, like a heartbeat gone quiet. And he whispered, "The sea remembers through us." That night, Bikini Bottom didn't sleep. Or maybe it did, but the dreams had spread so far, so deep, that the boundary between waking and sleeping dissolved entirely. The sea itself had begun to hum, softly, almost like a lullaby. The hum drifted through every street, every shell, every home. It echoed through the walls of the Krusty Krab, through SpongeBob's pineapple, through Squidward's stone face, through the coral mounds and seaweed curtains of every creature in town. And though no one could quite explain it, no one was afraid, because the sound didn't hurt. It comforted. It was as if the ocean had wrapped itself around them, whispering, "You're still part of me. You always were." SpongeBob sat outside his house, gazing up at the dark water sky. The stars above flickered faintly, but every now and then one would pulse in rhythm with the glow beneath the sea. He whispered to himself, "It's breathing. The sea is breathing again." Patrick waddled up beside him, carrying a pillow. "I tried to sleep," Patrick mumbled, "but the pillow started glowing too, so I thought maybe I should just glow with it." SpongeBob smiled, but his eyes stayed fixed on the horizon. "Do you feel it too, Patrick? That hum?" Patrick nodded. "Yeah, it feels like my head is full of bubbles, but the bubbles are whispering nice things." SpongeBob chuckled softly. "That's probably the sea talking." Patrick blinked. "The sea's nice." "Yeah," SpongeBob said, his voice distant. "She's always been nice. We just forgot how to listen." The two friends sat there in silence, the hum surrounding them like a blanket. The coral lights flickered faintly around the neighborhood, each one pulsing in time with the slow, steady heartbeat of the deep. Farther away, Squidward stood by his window, his clarinet in his hands again. He didn't remember picking it up. It just felt right, as though the instrument itself wanted to be part of the song. He pressed it to his lips and played a single note. The sound floated outward, merging with the ocean's hum. It didn't echo or fade, it joined the rhythm, weaving itself into the vast, gentle melody already filling the sea. And then something beautiful happened. From the distance, Patrick's voice hummed softly in his sleep. Then SpongeBob's laughter drifted faintly across the water. Even Sandy, asleep in her dome, murmured softly as her dreams glowed faintly amber. Each sound joined Squidward's note. Each one became part of the lullaby. Soon all of Bikini Bottom was singing without realizing it, not with words, not with instruments, but with the quiet music of existing. And far below, the glowing heart beneath the Krusty Krab pulsed brighter. Mr. Krab stood alone inside his restaurant, the lights dim. He looked down at the hatch, the one they had opened before, now sealed again, and felt a warmth beneath his claws. He whispered, "You were under me feet this whole time, and I never thanked you." The walls of the Krusty Krab shimmered faintly. The light from below moved up the planks, tracing the outlines of the restaurant's wood, the tables, the register. For the first time, the building itself seemed alive. Mr. Krab smiled softly, his voice breaking with a tired laugh. "Guess you've been holding me up longer than I knew, eh?" The sea answered, not with words, but with another slow pulse of light. It passed through the floorboards, up his claws, through his chest, steady, peaceful, forgiving. And for the first time since his youth, Mr. Krabs felt safe. Outside, the light had spread to the very edges of Bikini Bottom. The rocks glowed faintly. The kelp forest shimmered with pale silver veins. Even the ocean currents themselves looked like they were glowing from within. Fish drifted slowly through the water, their eyes half closed as if caught between waking and dreaming. And at the center of it all, the Krusty Krab shone brightest. It stood like a lantern, its windows breathing with the same rhythm as the ocean's heart. Inside, the tables cast long, soft shadows across the floor. The golden glow from below moved like slow-moving clouds, climbing the walls, curling through the air like mist. Everything was quiet. Everything was still. And in that stillness, a new sound emerged, faint at first, then growing clearer. It was the sound of waves breaking, not from above, but from within the sea itself. The ocean was remembering its own shore. SpongeBob finally arose to his feet. He could feel the rhythm through his soles, through his breath. Patrick mumbled beside him, already half asleep. "Are we dreaming again, SpongeBob?" SpongeBob smiled gently. "I think the dream never ended, Patrick. We just started living inside it." The two of them looked out toward the Krusty Krab, its glow soft and steady. And then, in perfect silence, the final pulse came. It was gentle, deep, and filled with warmth. The whole ocean seemed to exhale a slow, endless sigh that carried peace through every grain of sand, every coral branch, every sleeping creature. The glow faded back to a faint shimmer. The hum softened until it was just the sound of the sea again. And as SpongeBob watched the horizon fade into calm darkness, he whispered to the deep, "Good night, old friend." The sea answered with one last ripple of light, like a smile, and then all was still. The glow faded, but the whisper remained. It wasn't loud. It wasn't constant. It was like a sound that existed behind silence, the gentle movement of something vast, something patient. Bikini Bottom had returned to its calm rhythm. The Krusty Krab opened as usual. The jellyfish floated lazily through the lagoon. Life, it seemed, had resumed its easy cycle. But underneath it all, the whisper never stopped. You could hear it in the way the waves broke softly against the coral cliffs. You could feel it in the stillness of the sand. It wasn't a voice now, it was the sea's breathing, quiet and steady, like a memory that refused to fade. SpongeBob woke early that morning, long before the sun's light filtered through the surface. He sat by his window, hands folded, eyes distant. He couldn't quite describe it, but he felt the sea humming again, softer now, but still alive. It didn't frighten him. It comforted him, the way a familiar dream does, even when you can't remember its details. He walked outside, the cool sand brushing gently against his feet. The whole town seemed softer somehow, the colors muted, the sounds rounder, slower. Even Gary moved differently, gliding along with a strange patience, leaving trails that glowed faintly blue before fading back to normal. SpongeBob smiled. "Good morning, Gary." The snail meowed, his shell flickering once with a soft green hue. SpongeBob's smile widened, but he didn't question it. He didn't need to. After everything that had happened, he knew the sea was still watching. At the Krusty Krab, business went on as usual. Customers sat quietly, eating their Krabby Patties, chatting about nothing in particular. But every so often, one of them would pause mid-bite and glance around as if they'd heard something. A faint hum, a distant voice. Something like a lullaby carried by the water. Then, just as quickly, they'd forget smiling again, going back to their food, their laughter echoing softly through the room. SpongeBob worked behind the counter, humming without realizing it, a tune he didn't remember learning. Each time he turned a patty, the grease on the grill shimmered faintly with greenish light. It wasn't the same eerie glow as before. It was warmer now, almost golden, like the sea had learned to glow gently instead of blindingly. Mr. Krabs noticed it too. He didn't say anything, just stood in the doorway, eyes half closed, listening. After a while, he muttered under his breath, "She's humming again. The deep. She never stops humming." SpongeBob turned, curious. "Who, Mr. Krabs?" Krabs looked at him, smiling faintly. "The sea, lad. She don't sleep. She just remembers softly." Later that day, SpongeBob went for a walk. He wandered beyond jellyfish fields, past the coral valleys, until the sand gave way to old stone. He found himself standing near a ridge that overlooked the trench, the same trench where, weeks ago, the glow had first begun. Now it was still again. But faintly, from far below, he could see small flickers of light, moving slowly through the dark. He sat on the edge, watching them dance. He didn't know what they were: jellyfish, spirits, memories. It didn't matter. They were alive, and they were peaceful. The water around him whispered softly, brushing against the rocks. He leaned closer, and for a moment he could almost make out words. They weren't English. They weren't anything he'd ever heard. But he understood them anyway. They said, "We remember you. You remember us. That is enough." SpongeBob exhaled slowly. "I hear you." And when he said that, the lights below brightened for just a second, as if the ocean smiled back. That night, the dreams returned. Not the dark ones, not the visions of the hatch or the glowing heart. These were simpler, quieter. SpongeBob dreamt of swimming through endless blue, the world around him soft and infinite. He saw jellyfish floating in slow circles, each one glowing faintly like candles. He saw coral reefs rising like cities, shells stacked upon shells, filled with sleeping fish that looked like stars. And through it all, he heard that whisper, low, constant, eternal. It wasn't calling him anymore. It was comforting him. He floated there, suspended in the sound, feeling lighter than he ever had before. For a brief moment, he wondered if this was what the ocean felt like all the time, holding everything, remembering everything, loving everything quietly. When he woke, the whisper was still there, faint but familiar. He smiled to himself and whispered back, "Good morning, old sea." And though no one else would have heard it, the tide outside seemed to sigh softly in response. The next few days drifted by like slow waves. The whisper never grew louder, it simply stayed, tucked beneath every sound like a soft harmony. The townsfolk stopped noticing it as something strange. It was just there, the same way the tide always was, or the way the sunlight bent as it passed through the water above. Everything seemed gentler. Patrick began to spend his days lying on the sand near Goo Lagoon, staring up at the surface. He said he liked to listen to the quiet. If you passed by, you'd see him stretched out on his back, eyes half closed, mouth slightly open as if trying to catch the rhythm of the sea with his breath. Sometimes, when the light caught him just right, you could see the faint glow pulsing from his chest in time with the waves. He didn't notice. He just smiled softly, mumbling things like, "The ocean's breathing through me, and it tickles." And for reasons no one could explain, the jellyfish seemed to gather near him, floating in slow circles. They moved like guardians, their tendrils swaying in rhythm to some deep, unseen music. If you stood far enough away, you might think Patrick was dreaming while awake, his laughter mixing with the whispering hum of the sea. Meanwhile, Squidward's clarinet changed. He didn't mean for it to happen. He'd just sit by his window at night, play the same songs. He always had the same lonely melodies that drifted through his walls for years. But now, when he played, something different emerged. The notes bent softly, glowing faintly in the water around him. And when the final note of each song faded, it didn't vanish completely. It lingered as if the sea was answering him, carrying the music farther than sound could reach. One evening, as he played, he noticed shapes moving in the corner of his eye. He stopped and turned, but there was nothing. Just faint trails of light curling upward toward the ceiling. He exhaled. "You again," he whispered. He lifted the clarinet and played another note this time, slower, deeper. And as the sound drifted through the room, he felt it, a gentle warmth pressing against his chest, a pulse that wasn't his own but moved in rhythm with him. The whisper filled the air, blending with the clarinet's tone. For the first time in a long while, Squidward smiled. It wasn't wide or proud, just peaceful. "Fine," he murmured. "If you're going to hum, you might as well keep time." Outside, the water shimmered with faint ripples of green light. The sea had found another musician. At the Krusty Krab, things were quieter than usual. Fewer customers came in during the day, but those who did always stayed longer. They didn't talk much. They didn't rush. They just sat there, eating slowly, listening to the soft hum that lived beneath the silence. SpongeBob moved gently between tables, smiling at everyone, his steps perfectly in rhythm with that hidden pulse. Even Mr. Krabs had changed. He still counted his money, of course, but every few coins, he'd pause and close his eyes as if listening for something. When SpongeBob asked him why, Krabs replied, "She's still whispering, lad. The sea ain't about gold anymore. It's about remembering what you built on." Then he'd pat the wooden wall beside him, whispering something under his breath that no one else could hear. The Krusty Krab, once just a restaurant, had become a kind of chapel, not for worship, but for stillness. The very wood seemed alive now, glowing faintly in the corners, breathing with the tide. Every creak in the floorboards, every flicker of the lamps, sounded like the deep ocean's sigh. Sandy noticed it too. She wrote in her journal every night, documenting what she called a collective oceanic resonance. She didn't understand it fully, but even her scientific mind couldn't deny what she saw. "The sea's magnetic field has changed," she noted one night. "Every living thing seems synchronized to the same pulse, including me." She tapped her chest, where she swore she felt that faint, slow heartbeat every few minutes. "It's like the ocean and I are sharing the same breath." Then she paused, smiled softly, and added, "And maybe that's how it's supposed to be." By the end of the week, the whisper had woven itself into the town's rhythm completely. No one spoke of it anymore. They didn't need to. It was in every laugh, every sigh, every moment of quiet between sentences. The ocean had become part of their language, a background hum of love, memory, and peace. And beneath it all, far below the sand and coral, the ancient glow continued to pulse slower now, steady, eternal. The heart of the sea wasn't sleeping. It was dreaming through them. The sea had always been vast, but now it felt infinite. The whisper that once lived only beneath Bikini Bottom began to drift outward, carried by the slow currents, the gentle tides, and the sleep. No one knew when it started. Perhaps it was the moment Squidward played his clarinet again, or when Patrick fell asleep under the jellyfish's glow, or maybe when SpongeBob spoke to the sea and the sea listened. Whatever the cause, the whisper spread. It moved past the coral ridges and open trenches, past the glowing forests of kelp and the silent wrecks of ships long forgotten. Everywhere it went, the ocean changed. At first, it was small things, the kind you could miss if you weren't paying attention. Storms on the surface grew weaker, the waves softer. The currents that once tore through canyons slowed, drifting like lazy dreams. Even the predators of the deep swam differently, slower, calmer, as though lulled by the same pulse that now moved through everything. Somewhere above, ships drifted across still waters, their captains wondering why the sea seemed so quiet. But down below, SpongeBob knew. He could feel it not just in his chest, but in the rhythm of the world around him. The ocean had entered a kind of waking sleep. Not dead, not silent, just dreaming while alive. One evening, SpongeBob went walking along the outskirts of town, following the faint sound of the whisper where it grew strongest. He passed through the coral plains, their tips glowing faintly under the twilight. Tiny fish darted between the branches, their scales catching the light like floating stars. The water was warmer than usual. Every sound, every bubble, every sway of kelp moved in perfect time. He stopped when he reached a small hollow between two cliffs. He didn't recognize it, but it felt familiar, like a place he'd been to in a dream. He crouched down and pressed his hand into the sand. Instantly, the whisper grew clearer, not words, not music, but something in between. It sounded like memories, like every laugh he'd ever shared, every tear he'd ever shed, every quiet moment he'd ever lived. And beneath those memories, something deeper, something ancient spoke softly. The sea carries you. The sea remembers you. You are not small. You are the dream of something vast. SpongeBob's eyes glimmered. I know, he said quietly. I feel it. He looked up toward the distant lights of Bikini Bottom. The entire town shimmered faintly, its glow moving like slow waves. Every window, every coral light, every home pulsed in unison, not blinding or strange, but calm, alive, as though the whole place was breathing together. For the first time, SpongeBob realized that the sea wasn't just around them, it was inside them. Every heartbeat, every inhale, every moment of quiet was part of that same ancient rhythm. As the whisper spread outward, other creatures began to notice too. Across the distant dunes of rock bottom, the glow reached the cracks between the cliffs. Down there, where sound rarely existed, the faint hum filled the stillness. The lonely creatures of the deep, the ones who hid from light, felt it. They didn't rise to the surface, didn't flee from it. They simply lay still and listened. For the first time in ages, rock bottom wasn't silent. It was peaceful. At Jellyfish Fields, the jellyfish gathered by the thousands. They floated together in great swirling rings, forming luminous spirals across the water. Each movement, each pulse, seemed to echo the same rhythm, the same soft heartbeat that lived beneath the Krusty Krab. Patrick stood in the middle of the field, eyes closed, arms outstretched. I can hear them, he said to no one in particular. They're humming my name. But slowly. The jellyfish drifted closer, circling him. And though Patrick didn't understand what they were saying, he smiled because the sea made him feel safe, as if even his simplest thoughts were important enough for the ocean to remember. Even the smallest creatures join in. The snails, the plankton, the drifting kelp. Leaves, all of them swayed gently, their movements falling into the same rhythm. It wasn't forced. It wasn't strange. It was as if the whole ocean had become one living being, every part connected, every sound leading back to that single, endless whisper. Above the waves, the moonlight rippled softly. The stars reflected in the water like countless eyes blinking in unison. And somewhere far below, the ancient light beneath the Krusty Krab pulsed once, just once, sending a final wave of calm through every corner of the sea. SpongeBob felt it pass through him like a sigh. It was as if the ocean had spoken again, saying, "You are part of me, little one. You always have been." He smiled, closed his eyes, and let the water carry the sound away. By the time dawn arrived, or what passed for dawn in the deep sea, the water had turned still again. Not empty, not silent, but calm in a way that felt alive. Every sound moved slower now. Every bubble lingered longer before it rose and disappeared. The ocean seemed to be listening to itself, echoing its own heartbeat through every coral and shell. Inside his pineapple home, SpongeBob stirred awake, though awake didn't feel much different from asleep anymore. The whisper was still there, flowing through his walls, drifting around his furniture like a thin current of soundless wind. He sat up, rubbing his eyes, and for a long moment, he didn't move. The morning light filtered in, pale and soft, carrying strange shapes through the water shapes that almost looked like memories. They shimmered and vanished, replaced by others. A faint image of him flipping Krabby Patties. A flash of Squidward's clarinet, echoing through the empty dining room. The faint outline of Mr. Krabs counting his coins while pretending not to smile. Every image moved for only a heartbeat before dissolving back into the water. And yet, as SpongeBob watched them, he realized something. These weren't memories trapped in his mind. They were the sea's memories. The ocean itself was remembering them, every laugh, every sigh, every quiet moment that had ever rippled through Bikini Bottom. He stepped outside, and the water greeted him like a breath of warmth. All around him, the town glowed with that same faint rhythm Holmes breathing, sand swaying, coral lights pulsing like veins of something vast and alive. SpongeBob smiled softly. "Good morning, everyone," he whispered. But his voice didn't echo. Instead, the sea answered back, not in words, but in the soft hush of waves against walls, as though it were whispering the same greeting in return. He walked through the streets, noticing how peaceful everything looked. Patrick was still asleep near Jellyfish Fields, his body half covered in glowing kelp. The jellyfish hovered protectively above him, their light dim and gentle, like lanterns set afloat for a dreamer. Squidward's house had its windows open, and through them came the faint, muffled notes of a clarinet, slow, patient, almost reverent. Even Mr. Krab's restaurant looked different. The Krusty Krab stood still in the soft current, its sign swaying faintly, its windows flickering with pale blue light. For once there was no clatter of dishes, no sizzling grill, only the low, endless hum beneath the floorboards. SpongeBob placed his hand on the wall beside the entrance. The whisper returned instantly stronger now, clearer than it had ever been. It didn't frighten him anymore. It didn't even surprise him. He simply listened. The voice that came through wasn't angry or demanding. It was tired, patient, and old. Older than the ocean, older than time itself. "You are my echo," it said. "You and all who live here. Every moment you laugh, every silence you share becomes part of me. The sea does not forget its children." SpongeBob closed his eyes. "We've always been part of you, haven't we?" "Always," came the answer. "But now you remember it, too." A pulse of light moved through the walls, slow and steady like a heartbeat. It passed through SpongeBob's hand, through his chest, through the town itself, and out across the open sea. He saw it as it went, a wave of shimmering calm spreading outward, carrying the memory of everything that had ever lived in the deep. The sea didn't want to be worshipped. It didn't want to be feared. It only wanted to be remembered, to exist in the hearts of the small, bright souls who called it home. And that, SpongeBob realized, was the real secret beneath the Krusty Krab. Not a monster, not a curse, but a memory, one that had never stopped whispering, even when no one was listening. The light faded slowly, and the whisper grew softer, until it became indistinguishable from the sound of the tide. SpongeBob took a deep breath and stepped away. He didn't look back at the Krusty Krab. He didn't need to. He knew it would always be there, beating quietly beneath the sea, waiting for the next dreamer to hear its call. As he walked home, the water began to glow again, faint ripples of gold and blue spiraling through the distance. He smiled, feeling the warmth of it pass through him. Somewhere behind him, a quiet voice drifted through the current. Not a warning, not a story, just a soft, endless whisper. Sleep, little ones. The sea remembers. SpongeBob looked toward the horizon one last time before heading inside. His eyes half-lidded, his smile small and peaceful. "Good night," he whispered back. And the ocean, in its infinite calm, whispered the same word in return, until the sound melted into the soft rhythm of dreams, and the whole world drifted quietly to sleep.